This is the Sci-Fi Griot. I'm your host, Nicholas Cunningham. In the last episode, we asked a hard question. What are we willing to give up? We talked about the bargains that show up in science fiction and in real life. The bargains we make when we're afraid, when we're desperate, when we're convinced the stakes are too high to slow down. But today I want to talk about something science fiction often handles better than we do. Not the sacrifice itself, but what happens afterwards. Because in the moment, sacrifice can feel heroic, it can feel necessary, it can feel justified. But times have a way of changing the meaning of our choices. So here's the question at the center of this episode. After we give up something, can we go back? Can we reclaim what we surrendered? Can we restore what we damage? Can we return to who we were? Or do certain decisions permanently shape the future? Science fiction keeps returning to this question because it understands something very simple. The crisis is not the end of the story, the aftermath is. One of the most dangerous myths in both fiction and real life is simply this: that hard choices are temporary, that moral compromise can be neatly contained, that we can do what's necessary and then return to normal. But lines don't work like that. Once you cross them, they become part of your map. Even if you never cross again, you now know it's possible. Science fiction understands the line in a way that almost spiritual. It's not just about rules, it's about identity. And after a sacrifice, the question isn't just, was it worth it? The question becomes, what did it make us into? Let's start with a captain who represents more clarity, and that's Captain Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation. There's a reason an episode Chain of Command stays with people. It's not just the torture, it's the aftermath. Because you can survive something terrible and still be changed. Captain Picard comes back to the Enterprise and he continues. But what about the internal costs? Science fiction is honest about this. Sometimes the victory is real and still incomplete. Sometimes the system saves you and still asks you to carry what it did to you. Captain Picard's story reveals something important. The aftermath doesn't always show up as guilt. Sometimes it shows up as frailty, as distrust, as a new awareness that the world is not as stable as you thought. And that's what makes can we go back such a painful question. Because Captain Picard can return to the captain's chair, but can he return to the version of himself that believed dignity was untouchable? Science fiction says not fully, and maybe that's the point. Now let's look at Captain Benjamin Sisko. In the episode In the Pale Moonlight is one of the most honest episodes Star Trek ever produced because it refuses to give you a clean resolution. Cisco makes a sacrifice. He compromises his ethics. He allows something dark to stand because he believes it saves lives. And then when he says, and he faces the camera and says, I can live with it, that line is haunting because it is an answer to the question we're asking today. Can he go back? Not really. He can keep functioning, but he cannot undo what he had done. He cannot unsee the effectiveness of compromise. And Star Trek doesn't portray him as a monster, it portrays him as a leader who chose a future and accepted the moral residue as the cost of that choice. Captain Sisko represents a certain kind of aftermath. The aftermath where the choice is justified, but the justification doesn't erase the stain. That's the difference between winning and being whole. Now, let's look at Battlestar Galactica. It's basically a master class in aftermath because the show itself keep asking, what happens when you make an exception and then live in the exception long enough that it becomes the rule? William Adama and Laura Rosalind don't just make sacrifices. They build a society while doing it. Under existential threat, they take action that would have been unthinkable before. For example, martial law or political manipulation. Decision made in secrecy because transparency might cause a public panic. And the thing is, it's not hard to understand why. That's why it's so terrifying. Because the show insists the danger isn't that leaders are evil, the danger is that leaders can be responsible and still create something harmful. After a while, the question isn't, can we go back? The question becomes, do we remember what back even means? When the culture adapts to crisis long enough, the crisis itself becomes identity. And once that happens, normal, quote, doesn't return. A new normal forms. And it usually includes the compromises you swore that was temporary. Now let's look bring into Captain John Sheridan. Captain Sheridan resists an authoritarian system. He breaks away and he chooses rebellion. But Babylon 5 doesn't romanticize the aftermath of resistance. It asks a different question. After you win, what do you build? Because overthrowing oppression is only the first act. The second act is reconstruction legitimacy. And reconstruction is where people get tired, where unity begins to fracture, where power tries to concentrate again. Captain Sheridan teaches us the aftermath of resistance isn't relief, it's responsibility. You don't just defeat a system, you inherit the consequences it left behind. And if you're not careful, you recreate the same dynamics just with different people holding the power. Captain Sheridan aftermath isn't about guilt, it's about vigilance. So, can we go back? Science fiction answers is complicated. Sometimes you can rebuild structures. Sometimes you can restore laws. Sometimes you can correct policy. But there are things that you rarely get back. One thing is innocence. Another is trust. Can't get back that. Another is more certainty. And finally, something that you rarely get back is the belief that stability is guaranteed. Once people have experienced crisis and once they seen what leaders will do under pressure, the social contract changes. Even if the threat disappears, even if the system apologizes, even if the leadership changes, the memory still remains the same. And science fiction keep reminding us memory is a form of reality. You don't return to the past, you move forward with the past inside of you. So here's the part science fiction handles with more honesty than more political speeches. After the crisis, after the compromise, after the sacrifice, there's residue, there's guilt, distrust, cynicism, justification, habit. And the question becomes, what do we do with it? Do we deny it? Do we normalize it? Do we bury it and call it progress? Or do we face it and decide what must be repaired? This is where your future is made, not in the crisis moment, but in how you respond afterwards. Because if sacrifice becomes a habit, it stops being sacrifice, it becomes identity. So, can we go back? Maybe not fully, but we can choose what direction we move. Science fiction doesn't always offer restoration, but it does offer reflection. It tells us if you can't undo what was done, you can still decide what it means. And you can decide what must never become normal. After a hard choice is made, what part of ourselves do we quietly stop trying to reclaim? And if a compromise saves the future, how do we make sure it doesn't become the standard? So, in the next episode, we're going to explore what happens when the compromise doesn't end, when systems begin to treat people as variables, when efficiency becomes more important than humanity. That's where we're headed next. This has been the Sci Fi Griot, a place to slow down, to reflect, and to imagine carefully.